Today's story is so intense, it blurs the line between courage and fear. Set in the untamed Old West, where survival depended on how steady your hands were when the shooting started. This was a frontier shaped by drought, violence, and men willing to kill for a patch of land and a strip of river. It all began with a simple refusal to sell water rights. A quiet act of defiance that unleashed a storm of bullets and blood across the prairie. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The Iron Spur Riders had been bleeding ranchers dry along the Brazos for half a year, ever since Dax Corvin broke out of Huntsville with 11 hardened criminals at his back. At first, they were careful. Isolated homesteads, stolen cattle, no witnesses left breathing. But greed had a way of rotting judgment, and Dax Corvin had grown bold. In a drought year, water was worth more than gold. Corvin believed he could crush small ranchers into selling cheap, then sell access back to wealthy outfits for a fortune. What he failed to understand was the kind of men who had carved lives out of this unforgiving land. Garrick tracked each rider through his scope, matching faces to wanted posters he had studied at Marshal Rowan Slade's office in town. Dax Corvin led the formation, a broad-shouldered brute astride a massive horse, black hat pulled low, known for putting bullets in men's backs. Riding beside him was his brother, Garrick Corvin, colder than a snake and twice as fast. The rest were murderers and thieves, their names scattered across wanted notices from Kansas clear down to the Mexican border. They were still 800 yards out, riding loose and unhurried, certain they would face no resistance. Garrick figured they expected him to flee or beg. They had no idea he'd sent Elin Crossway and their granddaughter Garrick Voss into town the day before, with strict orders not to return until they heard from Marshal Rowan Slade himself. They also didn't know Garrick had spent 40 years memorizing every fold and hollow of this land, every rise that could favor a defender. And they sure as hell didn't know he had once been one of the finest long-range shooters the Union ever trained. The lead riders crossed the 700-yard mark. Garrick's finger brushed the trigger, familiar as a heartbeat. Not yet. Let them believe they held the edge. 600 yards. 500. The crosshairs settled square on Dax Corvin's chest, rising and falling with the rhythm of his horse's stride. Garrick slowed his breathing until the world narrowed to a single point of focus. 400 yards. The rifle thundered. Dax Corvin flew backward from the saddle as if his strings had been cut. The crack of the shot rolled across the plains, and for a heartbeat, the remaining 11 riders froze, stunned. Their leader lay twisted in the dirt, blood spreading across his shirt as his black hat tumbled away in the wind. Then chaos erupted. Garrick was already cycling the rifle, ejecting the spent casing and chambering another round before shock gave way to panic. Garrick Corvin screamed something incoherent, fury and disbelief tearing from his throat. The riders scattered, horses wheeling in every direction as they searched desperately for cover where little existed. The second shot dropped Silent Crowther, a narrow-framed rider racing for a shallow draw. The bullet struck high in the shoulder, snapping him sideways. He slammed into the dirt and didn't rise. Garrick didn't pause to check whether the man was dead. Men down were men out, and the rest had found their fear. Gunfire cracked back toward the ranch house. Wild, panicked shots from horseback aimed at a target 400 yards away. Garrick Voss remained steady, unmoved, as lead tore through the air around him. Garrick Voss didn't so much as blink. He had heard that sound, the crack of incoming lead, too many times to let it shake him now. His eyes followed a bearded rider swinging wide to the north. Garrick led the target just enough to account for the wind and the horse's stride, then pressed the trigger. The man jolted hard and folded forward over his saddle horn, but the horse never slowed, carrying its wounded or dying load off across the open prairie. 3 men down. The remaining Iron Spur Riders scrambled for whatever protection they could find, dismounting, crouching behind rocks, brush, and even their own horses. Their return fire grew sharper. Bullets slammed into the ranch house, thudding against the walls, splintering wood from the porch rail. It was time to move. Garrick seized the Winchester, left the long rifle behind, and slid low toward the front door. A round hissed past his ear like an enraged wasp. Another punched clean through the brim of his hat. Garrick did not rush. Rushing got men killed. He reached the doorway, slipped inside, and headed straight for the second firing position he had prepared before sunrise. The west-facing bedroom window. From there, Garrick gained a new angle on the scattered gunmen. They had tucked themselves behind a shallow rise roughly 300 yards out, and they were already committing their first error. They were packed too close together, like greenhorn soldiers who hadn't yet learned that clustering made a marksman's work easier. He seated the Winchester against his shoulder and waited. Patience, his grandfather had always said, was the deadliest weapon a hunter owned. Garrick had learned that lesson chasing deer through the Tennessee hills more than 60 years earlier. A man who waited would always outlast a man who rushed. Movement broke the stillness. A young gunman, no more than 25, lifted his head just above the ridge, searching for Garrick's position. The Winchester cracked once. The young man vanished back behind the rise. Garrick couldn't tell if he'd struck flesh or simply forced the boy down, but either way, the result suited him just fine. Minutes dragged under the merciless Texas sun. Garrick could hear the riders shouting to one another, voices tight, plans half-formed. Fear had settled in now, and fear made men sloppy. They had ridden in expecting to face one aging rancher, probably thought they'd hang him, shoot him, and claim his land by nightfall. Instead, they had entered a killing ground. "Voss!" a voice howled across the distance. That would be Merrick Corvin. Garrick recognized the rage in the sound alone. "You killed my brother, you bastard. We're gonna burn you out and feed you to the coyotes." Garrick didn't answer. Words wouldn't change what was coming. "You hear me, old man?" Merrick shouted. "We got time. We'll wait till dark if we have to. Then we're coming for you." That was their second mistake, handing him their plan. Garrick's mouth curved into a hard smile. They didn't know about the kerosene lamps set inside the house, ready to be lit in seconds. They didn't know about the firing lanes he'd cleared through the brush over months of quiet work. They didn't know about the range markers he'd carved into stone and fence posts around the property. This wasn't just his home. It was a fortress. 3 riders suddenly burst from cover, spurring their mounts hard to the left, trying to swing wide toward the barn. Garrick tracked the lead man, adjusted for speed, and fired. The rider flew from the saddle. His horse kept running, 4 down. The other 2 flanking riders veered away instantly, abandoning the maneuver. Lesson learned. Garrick worked the Winchester's lever, chambered a fresh round, and swept the barrel across the field, hunting for the next mistake. The sun had begun its slow descent westward. Shadows stretched longer across the plains, but there were still hours of daylight left. Plenty of time. A flicker near a stand of mesquite 200 yards out caught his eye. Someone was trying to creep forward using the thin cover. Garrick aimed low, at the base of the largest tree, and waited. A man broke from cover. The Winchester spoke. The runner stumbled, nearly fell, then staggered into concealment again, alive but wounded. 5 casualties, 7 still breathing. The numbers were finally turning. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from several positions at once. A coordinated volley meant to pin Garrick down while another move was made. He dropped below the window frame, counted silently to 5, then rose at a different spot. A rider came charging straight for the house, crouched low over his horse's neck, firing a pistol one-handed, brave and stupid. At that distance, a pistol was useless. Garrick led the charge, squeezed the trigger, and the rider's hat spun off into the air. The rider didn't slow. Garrick Voss fired again, and this time the horse buckled, collapsing beneath its own momentum and flinging its rider headlong over the animal's neck. The man hit the dirt hard, rolled, scrambled to his feet, and sprinted for cover, diving behind the water trough along the south wall of the house. Too close. Far too close. Garrick moved fast through the interior, boots pounding toward the kitchen. The trough sat barely 30 feet from the kitchen door, with nothing but open ground between. The gunman had nerve, making a charge like that. But all he'd done was corner himself. Once night fell, he couldn't stay there. And in daylight, crossing that open space would be suicide. Garrick took the shotgun from beside the door, snapped it open to check both barrels, buckshot just as he'd left it, then brought it up and waited. The afternoon heat pressed down inside the house like a smothering hand, but he barely felt it. Outside, the man behind the trough had gone quiet, no doubt weighing his options. "Sure you will," Garrick said calmly, answering the silence. "Just climb back on your horse and ride off while I put a round through your spine." He paused. "Your horse is dead. I can see it from here. But there are 6 others still standing out there with empty saddles." Silence stretched. "You might catch one if you move fast," Garrick continued. "So why would I let you go?" He answered himself. "Because you had the guts to make that run. Foolish guts, but guts all the same. And because you're not Dax Corvin or his brother. You're just a young man who chose the wrong company." Another long pause. "I can't just leave," the voice finally said. "Merrick Corvin will kill me." "Merrick Corvin is going to die today," Garrick replied evenly. "Same as his brother. The question is whether you die with him." The young man's voice cracked when he spoke again. "I never killed anyone. I swear it. I joined up 3 weeks ago. Thought it was just cattle rustling. I didn't know they were murdering folks." Garrick weighed the words. The boy might have been lying, grasping at mercy, or he might have been telling the truth. Either way, Garrick meant what he'd said. He had no interest in killing a man who didn't need killing. "Here's how this goes," Garrick said. "You stand up, both hands empty where I can see them. You walk straight away from this house. Don't look back. You leave Texas, and you stay gone. You understand?" "Yes, sir." "And if I ever hear your name tied to outlaw business again," Garrick added, "I will find you. You believe that?" "Yes, sir, I do." "Then stand up. Start walking." The young gunman, Ren Talbot, rose slowly from behind the trough, hands high and empty, and backed away across the open ground. Garrick watched from the kitchen window, fully expecting at any second to hear a shot from the remaining Iron Spur Riders. But the boy made it back to the low-rise unharmed. Voices flared in argument. Then Ren broke away, moving fast toward the scattered riderless horses. 6 left. Merrick Corvin and 5 hardened killers. Garrick moved through the house again, checking each window, reassessing. The sun was sinking now, leaving maybe 3 good hours of daylight. The men outside had to be thirsty. Their canteens would be running low in this heat. Garrick had spent the morning drinking freely, and a full bucket of water sat beside him. Another edge. Then he heard it. Hoofbeats, but not from the gang's direction. Garrick crossed to the north-facing window, and his stomach tightened. 3 riders were coming hard from town. Even at a distance, he recognized the calico dress fluttering in the wind. Elin Crossway. His wife had returned, and she brought Marshal Rowan Slade and Coley Brent. "No," Garrick breathed. "Elin, no." He saw Merrick Corvin notice them too. The outlaws shifted their focus instantly, sensing opportunity. Hostages, a bargaining chip. Garrick didn't hesitate. He grabbed the Winchester and burst out the front door, firing as he ran, not aiming to kill, but to drag every eye back to him. He vaulted the porch rail and sprinted for Ashfall, still saddled and tied in the barn shadow where he'd left him that morning. Bullets chewed dirt at his heels. Something tore at his sleeve. Garrick reached the horse, ripped the reins free, and swung into the saddle in one fluid motion his body remembered from decades of hard riding. Ashfall lunged forward, answering the urgency in his rider's weight. He had to reach Ellen before they did. Nothing else mattered. Not the ranch, not the defenses, not his own life. He'd spent 40 years protecting her, and he wasn't about to stop now. Ashfall stretched into a full gallop, eating the ground with desperate speed. Garrick leaned low over the horse's neck, making himself small, the Winchester held ready in his right hand. Behind him, the outlaws mounted up, shouting. Marshal Rowan Slade had seen the danger now. He reined hard and turned back, trying to put distance between himself and the riders. But Elin's horse kept coming. Either she hadn't grasped the danger, or she was refusing to retreat. Garrick knew which. 40 years of marriage had taught him one truth beyond doubt. Elin Crossway didn't run from anything. "Get back!" Garrick Voss bellowed across the open ground. Elin Crossway turned in the saddle. She heard him. Garrick saw it in the way her horse checked, in the sudden awareness that ran through her posture. She wheeled around and pushed her mount after the marshal toward town. But the Iron Spur Riders were closing fast. Too fast. They were going to reach her. Garrick angled Ashfall hard across the field, cutting the distance, his mind measuring speed and ground with the cold accuracy earned from decades in the saddle. He would reach Ellen first, but barely. 30 seconds, maybe less. Everything that mattered would be decided in those seconds. The Winchester was useless at a full gallop. Garrick let it drop against his chest by the sling and drew the Colt instead. The revolver settled into his grip like it belonged there, an extension of muscle and memory. He had fired it thousands of times, learned its balance, trusted it from horseback at 40 yards, if luck held. Luck had better hold now. He closed on Elin, saw the fear in her eyes, but also resolve. "Ride," Garrick shouted. She didn't hesitate. Elin dug in her heels, and Garrick swung Ashfall around, putting himself squarely between his wife and the charging riders. 4 men were coming hard, fanned out across the ground. The other 2 had stayed back, wounded or cautious. Garrick lifted the revolver, arms steady despite the thunder of Ashfall's stride. The lead rider was 50 yards out and closing fast. Garrick fired. The horse stumbled, pitched forward, and the rider flew over its head, slamming into the dirt. Garrick fired again. Another rider veered away, clutching his arm. 3 still coming. The Colt held 6 rounds. 2 were gone. 4 left. The outlaws widened their spread, trying to take him from both sides. Smart. Garrick had expected it. He reined Ashfall sharply to the right, charging straight at the nearest man instead of giving ground. Surprise flashed across the outlaw's face as he tried to bring his pistol up. Too slow. Garrick fired. The bullet struck high in the man's chest, throwing him backward out of the saddle. 3 down. 3 left. A bullet cut the air beside Garrick's head, close enough for him to feel it. He twisted in the saddle and spotted Merrick Corvin coming in from the left, face twisted with rage, closing for blood. Garrick fired twice in rapid succession. The first shot missed. The second tore into Merrick's shoulder, spinning him sideways, but not knocking him loose. Merrick's answering shot punched into Ashfall's hindquarters. The horse screamed, stumbled, and went down hard. Garrick kicked free of the stirrups as Ashfall fell, rolling clear and coming up in a crouch. One bullet remained in the revolver. 2 riders were still mounted, one on each flank. Merrick was wounded, but still circling, hunting another opening. The Winchester. Garrick had dropped it when he drew the Colt, but it still hung by the sling across his chest. He dragged it forward, worked the lever one-handed, and raised it just as the nearest rider closed to 20 yards. The rifle thundered. The rider clutched his stomach and folded over his horse's neck. The animal veered away, carrying its dying rider with it. That left Merrick Corvin and one more man. A heavy-set outlaw on a paint horse was charging from behind. Garrick turned, but not fast enough. The man's pistol was already leveled. The shot hit Garrick low on the left side, just above the hip. White-hot pain exploded through him. His legs buckled, and he dropped to one knee, the Winchester slipping from his grasp. The world tilted. Garrick fought to keep his sight clear as blood soaked warm through his shirt. He'd been shot before. He knew the signs. A few minutes before shock set in, maybe more, if luck held. He forced his right hand steady and raised the Colt. 1 round left. The heavy-set man was already wheeling his paint horse around for another pass. Garrick fired. The bullet caught Barlow Knott square in the throat. The man made a wet choking sound and toppled from the saddle, dead before he hit the ground. The revolver clicked empty. Garrick reached for fresh cartridges on his gun belt, but his left hand wouldn't obey. Numb, useless. The wound was worse than he'd thought. Hoofbeats thundered behind him. Garrick Voss twisted around, lifting the empty revolver by sheer instinct and bluff. But Merrick Corvin was already there. His horse reared above Garrick's crouched body, hooves slicing the air. Merrick's pistol was leveled straight at Garrick's head. "You killed my brother," Merrick screamed. Blood streamed down Merrick's left arm from the shattered shoulder, yet his shooting hand remained steady. "You killed Dax Corvin. He earned it," Garrick said evenly, locking eyes with him. "All of you did." Merrick's face twisted with hatred. "You're going to die slow, old man. I'm gut shooting you and watching you bleed out right here." The pistol lowered, aiming for Garrick's belly. Garrick saw Merrick's finger tighten on the trigger. So this was it. The end of the trail. At least Elin Crossway had gotten away. At least she was safe. The gunshot shattered the air. But Garrick felt no new pain, no impact. Instead, he watched Merrick Corvin's expression collapse into shock. The outlaw looked down at his chest, where a dark red bloom spread across his shirt. He looked back up at Garrick, confused, then toppled sideways from the saddle. Behind him sat Elin Crossway, mounted and steady, a rifle smoking in her hands. Her face was pale, carved from iron. The same look she'd worn when she'd chosen the frontier with Garrick 40 years earlier. The same strength that had carried her through drought, sickness, and Apache raids. "I told you I'd always have your back," she said. Marshal Rowan Slade and Coley Brent thundered in moments later, raining hard and dismounting in a storm of dust. Rowan took in the bodies scattered across the prairie and let out a low whistle. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," he muttered. "You started a war out here," the marshal said. "They started it 6 months ago," Garrick replied, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. "I finished it." Coley Brent moved among the fallen riders, confirming what was already plain. All of them were dead or dying. Abner Huleen's murder had been answered. The terror along the Brazos was over. Elin dismounted and dropped beside Garrick, her hands firm but gentle as she examined the wound. Her rifle lay forgotten in the dirt. "You stubborn fool," she said, her voice shaking. "I told you to wait for the marshal. I told you not to face them alone." "Couldn't wait," Garrick said. The prairie tilted, spinning slowly around him. "They were coming today. Had to stop them before they hurt anyone else. You've been shot. I noticed." "Don't joke," Elin snapped. "Don't you dare die on me, Garrick Voss." Marshal Rowan Slade stepped closer, concern lining his weathered face. "We need to get him to Dr. Nolan Bryce in town. That wound needs proper care." "Help me get him on my horse," Elin said. Between the three of them, they lifted Garrick into the saddle. Pain flared white-hot through his side. Elin climbed up behind him, holding him steady. Rowan gathered the reins of Ashfall, checking the horse's wounded hindquarters. The animal would live. More than could be said for the men who had ridden against the Voss ranch. As they turned toward town at a slow pace, Garrick looked back once more. His ranch house still stood against the Texas sky. Smoke curled from one corner where a stray round had sparked a small fire. But it looked manageable. The house would stand. The land would endure. That was what mattered in a place like this. A man defended what was his, or he lost it. Nothing more to it. Dr. Nolan Bryce's office smelled of whiskey and carbolic acid, the sharp, familiar scent of frontier medicine. Garrick lay bare to the waist on the examination table as the doctor worked with calm, practiced hands. Elin stood beside him, gripping his shoulder, knuckles white. "You're lucky," Bryce finally said. The bullet passed clean through. Missed the kidney, missed the gut. "You'll pass blood for a few days, and you won't lift anything heavy for a month. But you'll live." "Told you I was fine," Garrick said weakly. "You were shot," Elin replied flatly. "That's not fine." Bryce cleaned and dressed the wound, moving with the efficiency of a man who'd treated too many gunshots to count. "Keep it clean. Change the dressing twice a day, and stay off a horse for at least 2 weeks. You hear me?" "I hear you," Garrick said. "Hearing you and actually listening aren't the same thing with you stubborn ranchers." Marshal Rowan Slade stood in the doorway, hat held low in his hands. "Garrick, I need your account of what happened today, for the record." Garrick Voss walked him through it from start to finish. From the first dust plume rising on the horizon to the final gunshot on the open prairie. Rowan Slade scribbled notes, nodding now and then. When Garrick finished, the marshal snapped his notebook shut. "Clean self-defense," Rowan said firmly. "The Iron Spur Riders were wanted for murder, robbery, and rustling across 3 counties. There'll be bounties on them." "Likely a decent sum," Garrick replied. "Don't want blood money." "It's not blood money," the marshal said. "It's justice money. You did the work of a dozen lawmen today. The territory owes you." "The territory doesn't owe me anything," Garrick said. "I was protecting my land and my family. That's what a man does." A hand tightened on his shoulder. Elin Crossway leaned in slightly. "What we did," she corrected softly. "And don't forget who put the last bullet in Merrick Corvin." Garrick looked up at her and saw the same steel that had drawn him to her 40 years earlier. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "I won't forget." 3 days later, Garrick sat on the porch in a rocking chair, his Winchester resting across his lap out of habit more than need. His side still throbbed with every shift of weight. But Dr. Nolan Bryce had been right. The wound was healing. Like everything else this land had thrown at him, he'd survived. A rider approached on a borrowed horse. Finn Helene, his shoulder bound in a clean sling, dismounted carefully and came forward, hat clutched in both hands. "Mr. Voss," the boy said, "I came to thank you for my father and for stopping those men." Garrick studied him, saw the grief in his eyes, the weight of being alone too young. "The Helenes were good neighbors," Garrick said. "Your father was an honest man. He didn't deserve what happened." "No, sir." Finn's voice cracked. "I've got nobody now. No family. Don't rightly know where I'm headed." Elin appeared in the doorway behind Garrick, as if the moment had called her there. She always knew when she was needed. "How old are you, son?" she asked. 17, ma'am. 18 come spring." "You know cattle, fences, horses?" "Yes, ma'am. My father taught me everything." Elin glanced at Garrick. He gave a small nod. They had already talked about this the night before. "We could use help," Elin said. "Garrick won't admit it, but this ranch is too much for one man now. You'd have a bunk in the small cabin, 3 meals a day, and fair pay." "What do you say?" Hope rushed across Finn's face. "You mean it? You'd take me on?" "We mean it," Garrick said. "But understand this. It's hard work. Full days for honest wages. No shortcuts. Can you handle that?" "Yes, sir, I swear it." "You won't regret it." In the weeks that followed, Jory Helene proved his worth many times over. From sunup to sundown, he worked without complaint, mending fences, tending cattle, and helping Elin with the countless tasks that kept the ranch alive. Garrick watched him with quiet approval, remembering himself at that age. Strong, driven, stubborn. The wound healed slowly, as wounds did in men past 60. Garrick followed the doctor's orders mostly, though he couldn't keep himself from light work despite Ellen's protests. A man couldn't sit idle when there was work to be done. Word spread across the territory about the gunfight at the Voss ranch. Each telling grew larger than the last. Some claimed Garrick had faced 20 men. Others swore he'd shot with impossible precision. Garrick ignored the exaggerations, but not the visitors. Ranchers stopped by to shake his hand. Edmund Carrick, the territorial governor, sent a letter of commendation. Everett Knox, a newspaperman from Dallas, arrived with a photographer eager to write about the last stand at the ranch. Garrick refused the interview. The story ran anyway, half of it imagined. The bounty money arrived from 3 territories, more cash than Garrick had seen in years. He gave half to Jory despite the boy's protests, telling him it was payment for his father's life and the warning he'd brought. The rest he set aside for hard times, though he suspected Elin would eventually turn some of it into ranch improvements. One evening, as the sun sank red along the western horizon, Garrick stood at the fence line with Jory, watching cattle graze in the quiet glow of dusk. The boy had been unusually silent all day. "Something weighing on you, son?" Garrick Voss asked. Jory Helene stayed quiet for a long moment, eyes fixed on the cattle drifting through the tall grass. At last, he spoke. "I've been thinking about that day," he said. "When you stood against all those men, weren't you scared?" Garrick considered the question. "Terrified," he answered honestly. "But fear ain't the enemy. What matters is what you do with it." Summer slid into fall, and the cruel heat of the Texas plains softened into cool evenings and skies heavy with the promise of winter rain. The cattle filled out on rich autumn grass, and the ranch began to thrive again. The wound in Garrick's side faded into a thick, puckered scar that ached whenever the weather turned. A permanent reminder of the day he'd stood his ground against 12 riders. 11, he corrected himself. He'd let one man walk away. Now and then, Garrick found himself wondering if that young outlaw had taken his warning to heart, if he'd left Texas and chosen a better road somewhere else. Garrick hoped he had. Not every man who strayed onto the wrong trail deserved to die on it. One afternoon, Marshal Rowan Slade stopped by with news from across the territory. Cattle rustling had dropped sharply. Small ranchers were sleeping easier. A few more outlaw bands had been broken up by lawmen emboldened by Garrick's stand. The frontier, it seemed, was growing a little more civilized, though it would never truly be tame. "You changed something out here," Rowan said, accepting a cup of coffee from Elin Crossway. "Showed folks they don't have to bow to bad men." "One old rancher with a rifle didn't change the world," Garrick replied. "Maybe not all of it," the marshal said, "but this stretch of it, sure." After Rowan left, Garrick sat on the porch and watched the sunset, just as he had thousands of times before. Elin joined him, easing into her rocking chair, her knitting needles tapping softly in the evening calm. Out by the barn, Jory tended the horses, whistling a tune Garrick didn't recognize. And Garrick understood then what he had really fought for. Not just the land, though the land mattered. Not revenge, though justice had been served. He had fought for the right to sit on his own porch in peace, with his wife beside him and honest work behind him. He had fought for the dignity of a life shaped by his own hands, paid for with sweat, and defended with courage. The frontier was changing, becoming something new with every passing year. But some truths endured. A man's duty to protect what was his, a woman's strength when danger came calling, and the worth of justice. Even when justice arrived at the end of a rifle barrel. Garrick Voss had done his part. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths. Some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.